This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu-Yuat. It's Wednesday, November 13th. This is Africa 54.
Historic impeachment inquiry hearings kick off on Capitol Hill. We'll have a live update. Does race affect perceptions of a student's behavior or academic performance? And what's keeping Nigeria's tech industry from achieving its full potential? We'll have details.
Tonight, we begin right here in the United States. The impeachment inquiry into U.S. President Donald Trump has reached a critical juncture on Wednesday as lawmakers launch their first televised public hearings, marking a new high-stakes phase of Trump's presidency. Democrats leading the U.S. House of Representatives probe have summoned 3 U.S. diplomats, all of whom have previously expressed alarm in closed-door testimonies about Trump's dealings with Ukraine, to detail their concerns under the glare of wall-to-wall news coverage. Trump's fellow Republicans are also going to question the witnesses and have crafted a defense strategy to argue he did nothing wrong when he asked the Ukrainian president to investigate political rival Joe Biden. Now, for more on the Trump public impeachment hearings, I'm joined live from Capitol Hill by Catherine Gibson, VOA's congressional correspondent. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
The hearing started about 2 hours ago. What are your observations so far?
Well, what I really want to emphasize is how this really sums up the arguments from the Republican and the Democratic side. This is their first opportunity to make their case to the American people because it's the first time that the witnesses have been out in public in hearings. We've had plenty of closed-door testimony. Both sides already know what they think about this case. Now it's up to the American people to decide, should President Trump be removed from office because he committed those 3 things that are laid out in the U.S. Constitution that can remove a president: high crimes and misdemeanors, treason, or bribery. Democrats say that the president has clearly committed bribery by withholding congressionally approved U.S. aid in return for help with his domestic political interests. Republicans point out that that aid was eventually released to Ukraine and that the president ultimately never got information on his political rival Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Those are the 2 arguments. Now it's up to the American people to decide, should Trump be impeached in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Now, Catherine, if you will, our African viewers are watching this as it happens. This is historic. Could you explain to our viewers what's the difference in the strategy being employed by the Democrats and the Republicans in this inquiry?
Right. So both sides are looking to convince the American public, as I mentioned before. But what the Democrats want to do is lay out a broader case that comes off of that July 25th phone call between President Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelensky. They say that they've built a broader picture of how the Trump administration was subverting traditional U.S. foreign policy channels in favor of the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and the president's personal political interests. Republicans I've spoken to keep saying that all you have to do is go back to that July 25th phone call and read the summary that the White House released. When they read that summary, they see no wrongdoing on the part of the president. Those are the 2 strategies that they have to get through, and it depends on whether the American people, which one they buy. Now, we do know that the polling data is slowly creeping upwards to support the impeachment of President Trump, and that may significantly change now that we're having these public hearings.
Catherine, very briefly, do you feel, as you watch this and you have been covering this, that the base supporters of President Trump are moved by this 6-week investigation that is continuing as he campaigns for the 2020 re-election?
Well, of course, we are in our first day of hearings here, so we will have to see and wait and see how that plays out. But what we do know about the president's political base is that it rarely changes. There is a core group of about 30 to 35% of voters here in the United States that are loyal to the president and that will stick with him no matter what.
Catherine, thank you so much for your insight. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson reporting live for us from Capitol Hill. In just over a year, Ugandans will go to the polls to elect a new president. Incumbent President Yoweri Museveni, who seized power in 1986, has since been elected 5 times and will be on the ballot again. The 2016 presidential elections were marred by allegations of fraud and voter intimidation. Uganda's opposition says it faces an uphill task leading up to next year's elections and that security forces continue to criminalize political activities. Last week, a conference organized by the main opposition party, FDC, was stopped by police and the organizers were arrested. Now, for more on the state of Uganda's politics, I'm joined in the studio by Francis Zake, Ugandan independent member of parliament and member of the Committee for Defense and Internal Affairs. Mr. Zake, welcome to Africa 54.
Yeah, I'm actually glad to be here on Africa 54 and on VOA so that I can represent the situation right in Uganda.
All right, so now what is the current state of the opposition in Uganda, and do you see the opposition at any time between now and the next election forming some sort of understanding between you as the opposition and the government?
Yeah, the situation in Uganda especially about the opposition is the continued actually torture, arrests on the opposition, the continued situation in Uganda with the government, that the government continues to actually not agree with us, the continued intolerance of government, whereby they don't want to listen to us. What they do is to demoralize us, to do unlawful arrests on us as the opposition, and also the continued bribery on the opposition, using the taxpayers' money on buying the opposition, part of our friends in the opposition, and also what I've told you, the torturing, like how they behaved on the FDC party members. You saw what happened to them. That is the situation right in Uganda.
So how does the government counter that kind of accusation? Because I don't have a representative here. How do they counter that? How do they say they're acting this way because of what? What's the justification?
Actually, the government has actually made Ugandans believe that the situation is normal, that the way the government is dealing with the opposition members, it's normal, it's lawful. They have made abnormal situations to be normal. And Ugandans are feeling okay about that. Actually, the Ugandans, they are taking the situation as if it is normal. But for us, some few of us, we do not take the situations normal. We take it on ourselves that we, as the generation, the young people, with the way people powers made it, that each and every day is a day of politics in Uganda, we have made Ugandans to get involved, to see that what government tells us is not real, and Ugandans never believe now in government.
So, right. Now, very briefly, what are you as the opposition doing to remain as a united front as you head to the next year's elections?
Yeah, what we are doing in Uganda as the opposition, we are organizing ourselves. We are trying to talk to our friends, for example, in the different political parties, as People Power is not a political party in Uganda, but it is a link to all the political organizations in Uganda, especially those who believe in change of the head of state to have another one peacefully. So we are talking to them so that they can buy an idea of us, the young people, to represent them in the upcoming elections in 2021 with the Honorable Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, aka Bobi Wine, so that we can actually work together with that candidate so that we don't have these other candidates and we take on the person of President Museveni because he has really behaved in a dictatorial way.
Well, I hope soon we can have a government representative talking to us so we can hear their part of the story. Thank you very much, Mr. Zake. Francis Zake is a Ugandan opposition member of parliament. November is National Adoption Month in the United States, and VOA is taking a closer look at the experiences of black children who are disproportionately represented in the U.S. child welfare system and are often adopted into white families. Stephanie Poole teaches 4th grade at a public school in Washington state. Since adopting 3 black children, the white suburban mom has learned some uncomfortable lessons about how race affects perceptions of a student's behavior or academic performance. Research shows adopted kids are more likely than others to experience learning and behavioral problems, and black children are more likely than their white peers to be disciplined for such problems. VOA's Claire Morin-Giborg reports.
One of my best friends came over to me and said, "Timmy just said she doesn't want to be a friend because you're black." That made me get mad and go walk out of class sometimes. And I would just go out of school and stuff.
So this is the behavior I was talking about. She would get punished for leaving class when class was an environment where kids were calling her out for the color of her skin.
Niara is the second of Stephanie Poole's 3 adopted children. The family lives in Seattle, Washington state. Stephanie teaches 4th grade at a suburban public school. Motherhood has taught her some hard lessons about how race can influence people's perceptions of a student's behavior or academic performance. She knows because she's seen it before with her son.
Yeah, Carter's already internalized that and said, I don't want to be black. And that's a horrible thing to hear your son say, that he doesn't want to be who he is, you know.
Like Niara, Carter has an attention deficit disorder and trauma-related problems. A school district psychiatrist evaluated him and said he had tendencies to be violent, aggressive, and disruptive. Stephanie insisted those labels be removed from her son's specialized education plan.
I went right to the special ed department and said, I want these taken off, because this is literally the school to prison pipeline where we're talking about how can you list these descriptors of violent for a 6-year-old boy?
Nicholas Zill is a research psychologist in Washington. He's the co-author of a study for the University of Virginia's Institute for Family Studies that focuses on the academic performance of adopted children. There's extensive research on the subject. It shows adopted children are more likely to have learning and behavioral issues than other students.
The thing that's striking is that with many, a large minority and even a majority of adopted children often have behavioral issues in the classroom, and they have some difficulty getting along with other children at a higher rate than biological children do.
As a teacher and a mother, Stephanie knows some children struggle in school, but she sees the education system as a big part of the problem.
If you look at the curriculum, it's mostly white. If you look at books, they're mostly white. And all of these things just disenfranchise our kids of color year after year after year.
Researcher Constance Lindsay says having a teacher of the same race can improve student outcomes. She was part of a team that analyzed the records of more than 100,000 black students in elementary and high schools. Those who had at least one black teacher had better results. Lindsay says it's the role model effect.
If you're growing up in a home that doesn't have a college-educated black person and you're able to see one at school who's your teacher, that might signal to you that, hey, I can do this too. If you have a white teacher who isn't trained in cultural competency and how to work with diverse students, it might be harmful for students.
Where's yours, downstairs?
Stephanie says they've flourished since moving from their Seattle neighborhood school to the Highline School District where she teaches, and where she says staff are trained to be sensitive to racial equity.
How much institutionalized racism is in our school structure is absolutely phenomenal. And I never had to realize that before I had black kids. And yet this has been the truth for all black families as far back as we can remember. But because I'm white, I never had to look at that.
Join us again Thursday when Claire Morin-Giborg brings you the story of Angela Tucker, who felt incomplete growing up, even amid a big family with other siblings, some white, some black, and adopted like her, and how her life changed after she found her birth mother. For more on this series, visit us online at voanews.com. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. And very shortly, we'll bring you our tech report, so stay with us.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
Could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/African beat.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. GT Bank Fashion Weekend kicked off in Lagos with designer Abdul Ademola, who showcased his latest collection, saying that the gap between gendered fashion is closing. Some of the best in African clothing design showcased their work on the runway of the fashion event. The event commenced with different masterclass sessions, ranging from standing out in the fashion industry to branding. The runway looks ranged from artisanal and finely crafted to loosely draped and flowy. Next up, a group of Egyptian students at Helwan University have developed an exosuit that can help carry up to 90 kilograms with the aim of preventing injuries caused by lifting heavy objects in factories and workshops. The exosuit mimics the movement of the human body during the process of lifting objects. The students say the exosuit will help workers by preventing injuries and aim to develop their device to carry heavier objects, reaching up to 200 kilograms. And finally, a Tunisian English teacher has developed an app that assists the deaf-mute in learning English through interactive videos using sign language. Named Let's, or Learning English Through Signs, the application is designed to help the deaf-mute learn English wherever they are for free. It offers interactive audio-visual material to teach English using Tunisian Sign Language. The application is still in the developmental phases and plans to include material serving different levels of English language proficiency. And that's what's trending today.
The fate of about 800,000 young undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States as children is in the hands of 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices. The court will decide if the Trump administration has the right to end the program called DACA, which protects the young immigrants known as dreamers from deportation. For most of them, the United States is the only home they have ever known, and they're protesting losing their protected status. VOA's Ladza Hoke reports the U.S. High Court heard arguments for both sides on Tuesday.
Protesters gathered outside the U.S. Supreme Court during the hearing to call on the justices to declare U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to end DACA illegal. Mexican-born Sirenio Cervantes, an aspiring medical student, was one of them.
When the president stopped DACA, all my dreams fell apart. I have worked hard all my life, and when the president ended DACA, he basically told me my future didn't exist.
Immigrant rights groups say they will fight for what is right, regardless of the court's decision.
We know
that we can't expect anything positive from this administration, but we also know that the immigrant community is strong. It's a force that resonates in the country.
The conservative justices on the court are expected to oust the entire program on the premise that it was created illegally in the first place, which is the administration's argument. But the challengers, notably Microsoft and Princeton University, want to focus on the importance of protecting these young people.
I think it's important for Microsoft for the same reason that it's really important for countless numbers of employers across the country, and why it's important for Princeton. We depend on these people. We depend on the dreamers. For us today, we have 66 dreamers who are employees. They're doing important work for us. We appreciate the role that they play, not just for us, but in driving innovation in this country, making the economy competitive. And we appreciate what it means in human terms as well, especially to have people who came here at such a young age, who know no other home, who deserve to stay and are adding to the strength of this country.
Some legal experts contend that Congress and not the courts or a president should determine the fate of the DACA program.
Even when it was implemented first in 2012, President Obama admitted that this was a stopgap measure, that this was not a program that was intended to go on in perpetuity, and that it was really just to give Congress more time to decide how to deal with this population of people. Of course, Congress has not done that, in large part maybe because of the existence of the DACA program.
The administration first announced its plan to end DACA in September of 2017. The plan was blocked by several judges in federal and appeals courts. Since then, the Justice Department has made attempts to bring the case to the Supreme Court, but has not been successful until now. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for our technology report, and joining us now is our tech reporter, Paul Ndiho. Take it away, Paul.
Hello, Esther. Nigeria has a vibrant and growing tech sector. Large firms are delivering services in healthcare, agriculture, and finance, while smaller firms are providing e-commerce platforms and other retail-related services. But a new report conducted in 2018 raises concerns about the fundamentals of the business environment. Joining me to talk about the survey is Vijay Ramachandran, one of the authors of the report and a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. Vijay, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for having me.
So tell me about the report. What were your findings?
So our report is based on the analysis of a survey of 93 tech firms conducted in Nigeria last year, jointly with the One Campaign. Their offices in Abuja conducted the survey and interviewed tech entrepreneurs, and we asked them about the challenges that they face operating in Nigeria.
There are about 55 very active tech startups in Nigeria that managed to raise about $100 million, as opposed to maybe 59 in Southern Africa that raised $60 million. Yes. How did that come about?
So Nigeria has a booming tech sector. It has a large population that will consume the services offered by this sector, and it has a very talented pool of young workers who can supply the manpower that's needed for app development, for digital platforms, for e-commerce, for retailing, and so on.
Just a quick follow-up on that. What has contributed this growth, especially in the tech sector?
I think many things. You know, it's a very attractive market, both for international firms and for local suppliers. As I said, you know, it has this very talented pool of young workers. It has a big market. It's very strategically located. I mean, Nigeria, in many ways, is the future of Africa, and I think everybody from the tech sector to other sectors are aware of that.
What struck you the most? What surprised you?
So I think we were surprised by, you know, how the constraints that entrepreneurs face are so basic. So, you know, people have talked about broadband cost and, you know, the failure of payments technologies and so on. And these are valid concerns. But what we found in our survey is that most entrepreneurs are complaining about electricity. They need a reliable, continuous source of electricity, and often they're not getting that.
Is that a result of the government failing to do that, or the government hasn't built an ecosystem where these guys can thrive?
So I think the government is trying to improve the supply of electricity, and it has, you know, conducted some reforms in the past few years, privatized some services, and so on. But the bottom line is the generation companies and the distribution companies do not have a cost-effective tariff structure. And so they're not able to make enough money. And so electricity is undersupplied.
Who are the major players, for example, in the agri or fintech or edutech?
Yes, there are a number of very exciting players. There's Andela, of course, which everybody has heard of. There's InterSwitch, which is a big digital payments company, which just got a $200 million investment from Visa. There's a very interesting agriculture app called Farm Crowdy. There are a whole range of apps. There's an app that supplies, that connects customers that need blood to hospitals that have blood. So there are a number of developers who are trying to address inefficiencies in the existing economy.
For companies like Andela or like Bloodlink, how are they able to stay competitive despite the fact that there is so much happening on the ground and everybody is trying to tap into that market?
So, you know, a number of these companies have a very good services to offer. They're addressing a gap that exists. But also we find that a number of these companies, to stay competitive, are using generators, you know, round the clock. And while that is enabling them to be efficient, it's also extremely expensive.
I also find it interesting that most tech giants here are looking at Nigeria as a potential place where they can do business. Why is that, as opposed maybe to going to South Africa or Kenya or Uganda?
So I think they are looking at those countries as well, but Nigeria presents a particularly attractive opportunity because of its very large market and its, you know, large pool of consumers who are willing to buy these services, whether it be, you know, services in healthcare or in you know, finance, or whether it be consumer goods. You know, lots of companies are using digital platforms to buy and sell goods, and that's also very attractive in a very large market.
Of the 94 tech firms that you looked at, which one has the potential maybe to launch an IPO in the next year or 2 years?
So I think a number of the larger ones will probably announce IPOs. You know, I think that many of the firms in healthcare look to me to be, you know, potential candidates, including the ones that are trying to address these linkages in blood and so on. But there are other healthcare firms too that I think look very interesting. I also think there's a lot of potential for companies that are in the payments system because, you know, Nigerian companies have tried to use international apps, and that's been a mixed bag, whereas if there are more local suppliers of digital payments technology, I think those could be very successful.
So you also talked about this burgeoning market in Nigeria, but what are some of the solutions? How can somebody maybe find a solution to those problems?
So I think it's really, really important to get the basics of the business environment fixed. You know, in some sense, we are looking at a 21st century sector, the tech sector, but the problems that the entrepreneurs are talking about are 20th century problems. They are problems with electricity, with basic services. And so I think, you know, fixing that will be very important.
Thank you so much, Vijaya. That was Vijaya Ramachandran, a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you very much, Paul. And be sure to join Paul Ndiho each Wednesday for another tech report right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a very good evening.